The moment you stop explaining yourself, people don't get confused. They get uncomfortable. And most people don't realize this. Discomfort is the first signal that power has shifted. Silence doesn't create chaos. It creates a vacuum. And human nature cannot tolerate a vacuum. Someone always rushes to fill it. The weak fill it with words. The powerful let others fill it for them. Here's the truth nobody tells you. You weren't born needing to explain yourself. You were trained to. From childhood, you were rewarded for justification. Why did you do that? Explain yourself. Give a reason. And every time you explained, you learned a dangerous lesson. That your actions require approval. That your choices need validation. That authority lives outside you. This is not politeness. This is conditioning. And it produces a very specific type of adult. Someone who speaks quickly, explains emotionally, defends unnecessarily, and wonders why no one respects them. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Explanation is not communication. It is submission, disguised as clarity. Let me show you how this trap works. When you explain yourself, 3 things happen instantly, whether you realize it or not. First, you signal uncertainty. Even if your logic is flawless, the act of explaining says, I need you to agree. Second, you invite judgment. The moment you justify, you hand the listener permission to evaluate whether your reason is good enough. Third, and this is the most dangerous, you flip the power dynamic. Now, they are the judge, and you are the defendant. Most people never recover from this flip, and they just keep talking, hoping clarity will restore respect. It never does. In fact, the more you explain, the less authority you have. History proves this again and again. Consider Napoleon Bonaparte, not at his rise, but at his decline. Early Napoleon issued commands. Later Napoleon issued explanations. He began justifying wars, explaining losses, appealing to reason instead of imposing will. And the moment a leader starts explaining instead of commanding, the crowd senses blood. Not because they understand the politics, but because they feel the weakness. Power is not logical, it is perceptual, and perception is shaped by what you withhold, not what you reveal. This is why silence feels so unnatural to you. Because silence removes your armor. When you stop explaining, you lose the illusion of control. And that terrifies the conditioned mind. But here's the paradox. The moment you feel exposed, others feel inferior. They don't know where they stand with you anymore. They can't read you, can't predict you, can't anchor themselves to your approval. So they do the only thing humans know how to do in uncertainty. They project, they assume, they fill the silence with meaning, and almost always, they assign you more power than you actually hold. This is the illusion of understanding. People think they want explanations. They don't. They want certainty. And certainty doesn't come from words. It comes from restraint. Look at Queen Elizabeth I. She ruled in an era of constant threats, foreign enemies, internal conspiracies, religious war. She survived not by explaining her intentions, but by never fully revealing them. Ambiguity became her shield. Foreign powers feared her because they could never predict her response. Courtiers respected her because they never knew how much she knew. Her silence wasn't absence. It was pressure. And pressure changes behavior. Now here's where most people sabotage themselves. They confuse silence with weakness. They think, if I don't explain, people will misunderstand me. But misunderstanding is not dangerous. Transparency is. Because once people fully understand you, they stop respecting you. Mystery elevates. Familiarity erodes. This is why over-explainers are often liked, but rarely followed. Liked people are safe, respected people are unpredictable, and humans instinctively submit to unpredictability. Here's the part no one prepares you for. When you stop explaining yourself, people will test you. And they'll push, they'll question, they'll provoke, not because you're wrong, but because they're trying to reassert control. This is the critical moment. Most people fold here. They panic. They clarify. They defend. And the power snaps right back out of their hands. But if you hold silence, if you don't rush to soothe their discomfort, something fascinating happens. They begin explaining themselves. They overtalk. They justify. They seek your approval. The dynamic reverses, and once it reverses, it rarely goes back. This is why Machiavelli warned rulers against excessive openness, not because honesty is bad, but because availability is fatal to authority. A leader who explains everything becomes predictable. A man who justifies every choice becomes negotiable, and negotiable men are controlled men. Silence is not about arrogance. It's about non-negotiability. You don't explain because you don't need permission. You don't justify because your standards don't bend. You don't rush to be understood because understanding is optional. Respect is not. And here's the cliffhanger most people aren't ready for. Silence doesn't just change how others treat you. It changes how you see yourself. Because once you stop explaining, you're forced to confront a terrifying question. If no one validates me, do I still stand by my choices? Most people can't. That's why they talk. But those who can, those who remain calm in misunderstanding, those who let others sit in discomfort, those who don't flinch under silent judgment, they unlock something rare, a presence that doesn't need noise, a confidence that doesn't ask, a power that doesn't announce itself. And this is just the surface. Because once you understand why silence unsettles people, you can start using it deliberately, strategically, ruthlessly. And in the next chapter, you'll see exactly how silence turns into unseen authority. Why people project strength onto you, and how doing less makes others give you more. Stay with me, because once you see this mechanism clearly, you'll never explain yourself the same way again. Here's what no one warns you about when you stop explaining yourself. Silence doesn't just remove weakness, it creates gravity. People start orbiting you differently. They lean in. They hesitate before speaking. They watch your reactions more closely. Not because you demanded attention, but because you stopped giving it away. This is unseen authority, power that isn't declared, but assumed. And assumed power is the most dangerous kind. The human brain is wired to fear what it can't measure. When someone talks too much, we measure them easily. We know where they stand. We know what they want. We know how to move them. But when someone speaks less than expected, the mind fills the gap. And it rarely fills it with weakness. It fills it with importance. This is why silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you larger. Let me show you the mechanism. Every social interaction has an unspoken question running beneath it. Who needs who more? The one who explains is answering that question. And the answer is never flattering. But when you pause, when you let a question hang, when you respond slowly or not at all, you force the other person to confront uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers projection. They start assigning motives to you, assuming confidence, assuming leverage, assuming authority, not because you proved it, but because their mind needs an explanation. And since you didn't provide one, they invented one. This is how silence turns into status. History is filled with figures who understood this instinctively. Take Otto von Bismarck. He didn't dominate Europe by speeches. He dominated through calculated restraint. In negotiations, Bismarck often said less than everyone in the room. He let others argue, reveal their positions, expose their desperation, while he observed. Foreign diplomats described him as terrifyingly calm, not aggressive, not loud, calm. Because calm signals one thing above all else: control. And control doesn't need to announce itself. Here's the part most people get wrong. They think silence works because it intimidates. That's not true. Silence works because it forces others to perform. The moment you stop explaining, people start compensating. They overtalk. They justify. They rush. And rushing is a confession. It reveals insecurity faster than any insult. Watch this carefully in real life. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. And the most powerful person is the one who speaks last, or not at all. Because timing is dominance, and silence controls timing. Now here's the hook most people miss. Silence isn't passive. It's selective pressure. You're not withdrawing. You're allowing the room to feel your absence. And absence creates tension. Tension demands resolution. And the one who controls resolution controls the interaction. This is why strategic pauses feel uncomfortable to others. They're waiting for you to release them, to reassure, to clarify, to soften. When you don't, they start adjusting themselves around you. This is projection at work. People don't see you as you are. They see you as they fear you might be. And fear magnifies authority. This is why rulers, generals, and power brokers throughout history cultivated mystery. Consider King Louis XIV, the Sun King. He spoke less than his court expected. He revealed less than they wanted. And because of that, every gesture, every glance, every silence was dissected for meaning. Courtiers ruined themselves trying to interpret his moods, not because he threatened them, but because he never explained himself. They lived in anticipation, and anticipation is submission. Here's the dangerous shift that happens once you internalize this. You stop trying to control perception directly. You let perception control itself. And this is where most people lose their nerve. Because silence invites misinterpretation. And misinterpretation feels risky. But here's the truth. Misinterpretation works in favor of the composed. The anxious suffer from being misunderstood. The grounded benefit from it. Because the grounded don't chase correction. They let outcomes speak, and outcomes silence criticism better than explanations ever could. This is why truly confident people don't rush to clarify. They wait. They let results land. They let silence mature. And when they finally speak, their words carry weight. Because weight comes from scarcity. Now pause here, because this next part separates observers from practitioners. Silence only works if you can hold it without leaking emotion. The moment your silence becomes defensive, it collapses. The moment it becomes passive-aggressive, it backfires. Unseen authority requires emotional neutrality, stillness. If you fidget, explain later, or seek reassurance afterward. You undo everything. This is why silence is a discipline, not a trick. It demands internal alignment. And you must be okay with people not liking you, not understanding you, not agreeing with you. And this is where power truly begins. Because the moment approval stops being your fuel, respect replaces it. And respect doesn't need consensus. Here's the cliffhanger you need to sit with. Once people start projecting authority onto you, you can guide that projection. You can amplify it. or you can destroy it with one unnecessary sentence. Most people lose power, not because they say the wrong thing, but because they say too much. And in the next chapter, we cross the final threshold. You'll see how silence stops being a presence and becomes a weapon. How restraint turns into leverage. How saying nothing at the right moment forces others to reveal everything. Because once you master that, you don't just command respect. You command outcomes. Stay with me. The real shift is about to happen. There is a moment most people never reach. A moment where silence stops being something you use and becomes something you are. At this level, you no longer decide to stay quiet. You simply don't feel the urge to speak. And that absence of urge changes everything. Because the highest form of power is not restraint. It's detachment. When nothing inside you needs reaction, no one outside you can control your behavior. This is the point where silence stops being polite and starts becoming intimidating. Not because you threaten, but because you are no longer emotionally available. And emotional unavailability is terrifying to people who rely on leverage. Here's the shift that separates amateurs from masters. You stop using silence to protect yourself. You start using it to extract information. And most people don't realize this. The quieter you are, the more others reveal. They mistake your silence for ignorance, or confusion, or hesitation. So they talk. They clarify. They justify. They overshare. And every extra word they offer is a piece of leverage handed to you freely. This is not manipulation. This is observation rewarded. History favors those who listened more than they spoke. Take George Washington during the Constitutional Convention. He rarely spoke. When he did, the room froze. Why? Because his silence made his words scarce, and scarcity creates authority. He let others argue themselves into corners, expose ambitions, reveal insecurities. By the time Washington spoke, decisions had already formed around him. This is how silence dominates without resistance. But here's where this becomes ruthless. Silence doesn't just reveal others, it tests them. When you don't explain, you force people to show their intentions. Those who respect you will adjust. Those who want control will provoke. Those who are insecure will demand clarity. And those reactions tell you everything. Silence becomes a filter. It separates allies from threats, confidence from insecurity, strength from ego. And once you see clearly, you stop wasting energy on the wrong people. This is where strategic non-compliance enters. Not rebellion, not confrontation, just refusal to over-engage. You don't argue, you don't defend, you don't chase resolution. You let discomfort do the work. Because discomfort exposes power dynamics faster than conflict ever could. Look at Margaret Thatcher. She didn't fill silence to appear agreeable. She let it harden her presence. When challenged, she didn't rush to soften her stance. She paused, and that pause unsettled entire rooms. People described it as being stared down without being stared at. That is weaponized calm. And calm is dangerous, because it signals one thing. I am not afraid of where this goes. Fear is loud. Confidence is still. Now here's the moment most people fail. They master silence in conflict, but collapse in relationships. They start explaining themselves emotionally, clarifying feelings, justifying boundaries, and the power leaks out again. True mastery means silence everywhere it matters. Not coldness, not distance, but self-possession. You don't narrate your decisions. You don't announce your standards. You let consistency speak. And consistency builds reputation. Reputation does more than words ever will. This is why the most respected people in any room don't advertise who they are. They let others discover it. And discovery creates belief. Belief creates loyalty. Fear creates compliance. Silence creates both. Here's the final hook. Listen carefully. Once you stop explaining yourself, people don't just change how they treat you. They change how they talk about you when you're not there. And that's where real power lives. In rooms you're not in decisions you didn't attend, in outcomes you didn't argue for. Silence travels. It turns into reputation. Reputation turns into authority. Authority turns into influence. And influence doesn't need permission. This is the final threshold. You no longer seek to be understood. You seek to be respected by default. You don't react. You don't rush. You don't defend. You move and let others adjust. Because once silence becomes your natural state, words become optional, approval becomes irrelevant, and control becomes internal. And here's the truth most people will never accept. The less you explain yourself, the more the world rearranges around you. Not because you demanded it, but because you no longer asked. That's when everything changes. And now you understand why the most powerful move in any room isn't what you say, it's what you refuse to say.